everybody, happy Friday. So my guess is that you have heard about the changes to the new Foreigners Act that happened on Thursday. And one of the biggest parts about that is this so-called digital nomad visa. So I wanted to at least touch base with you guys to let you know what's going on with the changes at the highest level. The act is like 200 pages long. It's going to take a bit of time for us to work with the lawyers to kind of go through all of the different changes so we can be sure of exactly what that means for you, so that we can also update our content accordingly, because we want to make sure that we have everything accurate and ready for you on January 1st. And that's going to take a little bit of time. But in the meantime, I wanted to let you know that we're working on it, and also kind of to go over the changes at the highest level. So I've spent the morning going over the Foreigners Act, and I stopped when blood started coming out of my ears. So it shouldn't be a surprise, but it's not as straightforward as we would hope. So let's go over this together, and I'll let you know what the highest level things are, what the questions are, what things that I don't feel like they necessarily have addressed yet, and maybe they did. But, and we really have to get into more details, but we'll have to see about that. Okay, so first, the work quotas have been abolished. So up until this point, if a third country national, e.g. a non-EU national, wanted to get a job in Croatia, or rather if a Croatian company wanted to hire a third country national, they could only do it if, in one of two ways. They had to be either within this quota system, which meant that for specific industries, there were only a certain number of people that could be hired, a certain number of foreigners that could be hired for those different industries. And if they were outside of the quota, then that meant that they had to get permission from the unemployment service, which is HZZ. So now there are no quotas whatsoever. That's cool, but that's, even if a Croatian company still wants to hire a third country national, they still need to get permission from HZZ, the unemployment service. What has to be done is a labor market test, which most likely will be the same kind of test that they have been applying to people outside the quota up to this point, which is checking to see if there are any other Croatians that are looking for that job. And if there aren't, then you are given permission to hire that third country national. So there are exceptions to this. A labor market test is not required for carpenters, masons, waiters, butchers, and seasonal workers up to 90 days for agriculture, forestry, catering, and tourism. All right, so that is the work quota situation. Now, temporary residence. This is something that was not in the news that I saw today, and I think it's really important to make a note of. On the list of requirements for temporary residence, they are now asking for a background check. That is new. So usually the background check is only required for people who are applying for citizenship. It's not even required for permanent residency. It's just citizenship. But now it is a requirement for temporary residence. So that is important to know, especially if you are planning to come here in the next 1 to 2 months. You're going to need to get a background check from the country where you have resided for the last 12 months. So keep that in mind. One really new interesting thing is that they are now offering temporary residence permits to people with Croatian heritage who do not yet have citizenship, which is great. And there are many of you who I've been talking to who are planning to apply for citizenship and want to live here and apply from here. And as we have discussed, you can't apply for citizenship within Croatia unless you have legal residence in Croatia. So now you can actually get residence based on having Croatian heritage, but there is a caveat. You have to get a certificate from the Central State Office for Croats outside the Republic of Croatia. Now, As I mentioned at the start, we're just going over this at a high level. I'm going to be going over this line by line in great detail with the team of lawyers that helped me validate all the information on expat in Croatia. So we're going to have more information about this in the coming weeks prior to January 1st when all of this goes into effect. But I want to at least give you the highlights so you know what to expect, because a lot of you are in motion. A lot of you have either just arrived or you're planning to arrive in the next few months, and I want you to be aware of how these things might affect you. So next is affect spouses of Croatian citizens that live here. Now, up until this point, you could get permanent residence or apply for permanent residence after 5 years of continuous temporary residence as the spouse of a Croatian citizen. Now, they have lowered that to 4 years. And I want to read this because when you have all the laws, the acts, you could say, they list all the different articles of the act, and at the end they have kind of what I would call a change log, whereas essentially like a summary of the changes that they made. And in that summary, they said more favorable conditions for acquiring permanent residence for family members of a Croatian citizen or life partner. Do not need to prove means of subsistence or take an exam in knowledge of the Croatian language in Latin script. Now, here's the thing. What they're saying there is that spouses of Croatian citizens no longer need to show financial means or take the permanent residence language test for the purposes of permanent residence. However, that's from the change log. But when you actually go to the articles in the law, I read the entire section on permanent residence, which is, I don't know, it's a bunch of articles, and I read it all. And it doesn't, for once, mention that you don't have to show means of subsistence or take the knowledge exam. That's not in the law. That exemption is not actually in the law on the section on permanent residence. Now, maybe it is in some arbitrary place in the law. That would not surprise me. But to me, that is weird. So that is something that I'm going to be focusing on with the lawyers to kind of find out, why it's in a change log, but where exactly is it in the law itself? Because it's not. But the part about getting permanent after 4 years, that is in the law. That is stated in an article, not just in the change log. So next is children of permanent residents. They can also get more favorable conditions in applying for permanent residence. So if a child of a third country national who has permanent residence, as long as at least one parent has permanent residence, then they can apply for permanent residence after 3 years of continuous temporary residence. So that also makes it easier for children. So that is really important. So next is members of the Croatian people. And this is also interesting, but I think it's going to require a lot more information. Members of Croatian people is something that really has only been referred to in the law on citizenship. It's Article 16 from the Citizenship Act, and that is an alternative for people to apply for citizenship who can't apply based on descent for a variety of reasons. So this is saying that they, can have more favorable conditions for acquiring permanent residence, which is interesting, but there's not a whole lot of information about it. So it says that they can apply for permanent after 3 years. And then it also says the same thing as it did for spouses, that there's no language test and they don't have to show proof of funds, but that's in the change log, that's not in the act. So we need to find out exactly what they're talking about there. Okay, I know that this is the thing that you've been waiting for, so I've left it to the very end. D visas and the digital nomad permit. So of all the stuff that I've already gone over with you and all the open items and questions and kind of confusion, this D visa thing, most confusing of all. So I'm going to read to you what it says in the change log, and then I'm going to tell you what it says in the act, and then we're going to discuss it. So the institute of a long-stay D visa issued to third country nationals who is in favor of entry requires a short-term visa and has temporary residence permit or an issued residence and work permit in the Republic of Croatia. So then there's another one that says a new purpose of temporary residence related to the state of digital nomads. So I think, in all of the hullabaloo and clickbait and speculation about this digital nomad visa, it kind of implied that there was going to be this new residence permit called a digital nomad visa. That does not seem to be exactly how this happened, or is in actuality the case. How it reads is that there is a long-term visa, and there is that you can apply for residence based on other purposes if you are a digital nomad. Now let's break that down a bit. So first, let's talk about this long stay visa that they're referring to is the D visa. In the law, it says it is only for 6 months. You have to apply abroad at a consulate or embassy or diplomatic mission, and that you must have been approved for a work and residence permit. And see, this is what I don't understand, because how can you, or why would you need a long-term D visa if you already have a work and residence permit? That makes zero sense to me. It's kind of like a chicken and the egg situation. I swear I read it 50 times. So that's something that we have to really sort out to understand. But I don't understand how the requirements for a visa have to be that you already have a work and residence permit. Okay. So the second part of this is this other purposes for digital nomads. So in the Foreigners Act, there was already a section called other purposes. And the other purposes section is vague. It's very vague. Essentially, it says that you can apply for other purposes, and that you, each time you apply, 6 months has to pass between the expiration of your first other purposes permit and the application of your next one. That's essentially all it says. And under other purposes, that falls prepayment of rent, which is a lot what many of you do is prepayment of rent, but prepayment of rent is not in the law. That is just an application that is done in practice. Residence based on owning a house, that is also considered other purposes, but again, it is not written in the law. It's all just based on practice and discretion. And the way that they've written this, it implies that digital nomads can get residence based on other purposes for being a digital nomad. So to me, what that suggests is that it's no different than prepayment of rent or getting residence based on owning a house, that you can just, that is the clause that's going to regulate it, this other purposes, because there's no additional detail at all. There is, they do define what a digital nomad is, and that is someone who, they use very convoluted language, which should not surprise anyone, but essentially someone who works online for employers outside of Croatia. So if you do this, you cannot work for any employer within Croatia. It can only be for outside Croatia. But they don't explain how you prove that you're a digital nomad. Like with prepayment of rent, okay, that's clear. You show that you've prepaid your rent for the term that you're applying for. When you are studying a language, which doesn't account as student residence, it counts as other purposes. you show that you're enrolled in something like Croatian. If you are applying based on owning a home, you show your land registry certificate. So that all makes sense to me. But how do you prove that you work online for companies outside Croatia? So that's it, guys. Those are the biggest changes to the Foreigners Act. And I know there's not a lot of specifics, and you know, it's going to take, like I said, it's a 200-page act, and they significantly added on to it. So there are lots of things that need to be combed through and completely understood, and that's something that I will be working on with the lawyers directly over the next couple of weeks, so that we can completely understand what let me rephrase that. Not completely understand, because there is no completely understanding any of the Croatian law. So much of it is written in a very vague way, which is why MUP has a lot of discretion. But we're going to go through it in finer detail to outline all of the changes. We'll update all of our content, but I want to make it clear that even though these changes have been made, I mean, this digital nomad thing, the D visa, those are very vague things. So I think that we're going to end up getting into a situation in 2021 when these go into effect, where MUP is going to be confused. They're not going to know how can they apply a law that is not completely clear. But, you know, for example, spouses of Croatian citizens who, it's extremely clear in the law that they can now apply for permanent residence after 4 years. So there's not going to be any kind of issue with MUP understanding that. But as far as how to prove that you're a digital nomad, so I'm overall, like, I'm glad that the government is trying to evolve how they deal with foreigners, but there are some gaps in here. So we will look over it in great detail. I hope that this was helpful to you in some way, especially if you are planning a move here in the very, very near future. If you have questions, feel free to send them to me. You can contact me on the website there are forms at the bottom of pretty much every single immigration post that I have based on your exact situation. You can contact me through the contact form, which is expatrincroatia.com/contact. You can contact me through a direct message on Instagram. You can make comments on this video and I will answer them to the best of my ability and knowledge. It will be really helpful to understand what you guys are thinking. What is your reaction to these changes? How are they going to affect you? So yeah, I'm going to have updates as I have them, and we're going to have all this stuff put up on the site. For the new residence programs for Croatian people of Croatian descent, I will have an entirely new post on that. For the digital nomad residents, we will have an entirely new post on that. And it's something that, you know, is going to have to evolve as we see how MUP implements it. Just like all of our content, it is evergreen because we are constantly updating it. And as the laws evolve, as MUP changes their practices, because they can change practices without it actually being changed in the law. And we're going to do our best to serve you, you know, with the information we have. And one of the ways we do that is by using your experiences. So your experiences are extremely important here. So please let us know what you're thinking about all these changes. And I will be posting updates about all of this over the next few weeks, also in January. So just stay tuned, and thank you so much for watching this video, and I'm just so glad that all of you are here. And yeah, that's all I got. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye, guys.